morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. Thank you. That was awesome. This feels great because this is my second time to be able to greet people today. My name is Beth Andes, and I'm a longtime member of this church, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody today on this gorgeous, gorgeous spring Sunday. First, before I have an announcement, and then I'm going to ask about guests. The announcement is that after service today, the Religious Education Department is sponsoring a reception downstairs. So please go downstairs and go from classroom to classroom because they have different treats and different exhibits and learn all about what our Religious Education Department is up to. Everyone is welcome. So, if you are a person who brought yourself here today and are a guest, or if you're a member who brought a guest and would like to introduce them, and you feel brave enough, please stand up and tell us your name and where you're from.
Tom Davis from Brandon.
Welcome.
I'm Jewish, and you people worship the Father holy.
Thank you. Are there any other guests? Yes, ma'am. Jennifer. Welcome. Yes, sir. Welcome. Okay, I guess the rest of you are regulars. Well, we're glad you're here. Good morning. Good morning. In this country and culture, we are exhorted to shoot for the stars, go for the gold, even make America great again. Now, set aside the idea that America was never as great as some folks hold it up to be. But there's something off with the idea that we have to try to be great all the time. No one can be great all the time, and sometimes we don't even manage to be good. Today we'll explore what life might look like if we shoot for, well, maybe the treetops, or go for the bronze, or make America good enough for the very first time. Let's begin our worship together with a deep breath. And these words from Richard Gilbert. In the midst of the whirling day, In the hectic rush to be doing, in the frantic pace of life, pause here a minute. Catch your breath, relax your body, loosen your grip on life. Consider that our lives are always unfinished business. Imagine that the picture of our being is never complete. Allow your life to be a work in progress. Do not hurry to mold the masterpiece. Do not rush to finish the picture. Do not be impatient to complete the drawing. From beckoning birth to dawning death, we are in process, and always there is more to be done. Do not let the incompleteness weigh on your spirit. Do not despair that imperfection marks your everyday. Do not fear that we are still in the making. Let us instead be grateful that the world is still to be created. Let us give thanks that we can be more than we are. Let us celebrate the power of the incomplete, for life is always unfinished business. We will begin our worship today by kindling the flame of our chalice. This ritual links us through space to all Unitarian Universalists who gather this morning around the world, and it connects us through time with all those who have come before us on this liberal religious journey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Khalil, and I light this chalice for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
Now will you please rise in body or spirit and join me in affirming our covenant. Goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now if you'll remain, we'll sing together just as long as I have breath. You may be seated. We have a story, and it's for all ages, so I wanted to make it so everyone could see. So the pictures will be on the screen, and I'll tell the story from here. So that's Gerald. Gerald was a tall giraffe whose neck was long and slim, but his knees were awfully crooked, and his legs were rather thin. He was very good at standing still and munching shoots off trees, but when he tried to run around, he buckled at the knees. Now, every year in Africa, they hold the jungle dance, where every single animal turns up to skip and prance. And this year, when the day arrived, poor Gerald felt so sad because when it came to dancing, he was really very bad. The warthogs started waltzing, and the rhinos rocked and rolled. The lions danced a tango that was elegant and bold. The chimps all did a cha-cha with a very Latin feel, and 8 baboons then teamed up for a splendid Scottish reel. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked toward the floor, but the lions saw him coming, and they soon began to roar. "Hey, look at clumsy Gerald," the animals all sneered. "Giraffes can't dance, you silly fool." "Oh, Gerald, you're so weird." Gerald simply froze up. He was rooted to the spot. "They're right," he thought. "I'm useless. Oh, I feel like such a clot." So he crept off from the dance floor and he started walking home. He'd never felt so sad before, so sad and so alone. Then he found a little clearing and he looked up at the sky. "Oh, the moon can be so beautiful," he whispered with a sigh. "Excuse me," coughed a cricket, who'd seen Gerald earlier on. "But sometimes when you're different, you just need a different song. Listen to the swaying grass and listen to the trees. To me, the sweetest music is those branches in the breeze. So imagine that the lovely moon is playing just for you. Everything makes music if you really want it to." With that, the cricket smiled and picked up his violin. Then Gerald felt his body do the most amazing thing. His hooves had started shuffling, making circles on the ground. His neck was gently swaying, and his tail was swishing round. He threw his legs out sideways, and he swung them everywhere. He did a backward somersault and leapt up in the air. Gerald felt so wonderful his mouth was open wide. "I am dancing! Yes, I am dancing! I am dancing!" Gerald cried. Then one by one, each animal who'd been there at the dance arrived while Gerald boogied on and watched him quite entranced. They shouted, "It's a miracle! We must be in a dream! Gerald's the best dancer that we've ever seen." "How did you learn to dance like that? Please, Gerald, tell us how." But Gerald simply twirled around and finished with a bow. Then he raised his head and looked up at the moon and stars above. "We all can dance," he said, "when we find music that we love." Let's sing the children on their way.
Good morning. My name is Anthony Edwards, and I have the great pleasure of serving as your music director. And part of my job here and part of my job to the greater community is also serving on the board of the AIDS Service Foundation. I'm the secretary of the board, and this is my 4th year on the board. And this is the 4th year in a row that All Souls has given part of our offering in April to the AIDS Service Foundation. The AIDS Service Foundation serves the greater Kansas City area and raises funds and awareness about HIV/AIDS. And we service the 4 ASOs, the AIDS service organizations here in town: Save Inc., Hope Care Center, Good Samaritan Project, and Casey Care Health Center. We also provide community grants to organizations who have education programs that support HIV/AIDS and its education. Uh, this morning we have from the Casey Care Health Center, we have a peer educator and a friend, Calvin Pugh, who's here with us to talk to us about the campaign this year, which is U equals U, which I'll let Calvin explain that untransmittable, I'll get it wrong, he'll do it. Anyway, help me welcome Calvin Pugh. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to my TED Talk. No, I'm just kidding. I've only got 3 minutes. I'd like to tell you a brief story about a young man in 2016 who was diagnosed HIV positive. And in 2016, not unlike today, he, like most millennials, decided to do what I ask patients that I see not to do. He decided to search the internet and look for answers. And not unlike today, the internet was full of myth and fake news. And he stumbled across a man ranting about something about not being able to transmit HIV. And in 2016, that seemed like a revolutionary idea to someone whose diagnosis had given them so much shame and unworthiness. That news gave him a spark of hope and inspired him to share with others and educate other people. That has given him the national stage and brought me here today. It's really important for our 31st annual AIDS Walk to have the theme U equals U, or undetectable equals untransmittable. It's a mouthful, we understand. This revolutionary science is the means that a person taking their antiretrovirals cannot transmit HIV to their partners. That breakthrough science is stigma shattering for so many people living with HIV. It means they can live and they can love and they can have children without fear of transmitting the virus to other people. We have come a long way since the beginning of this epidemic, but we have so much further to go. We've come a long way here in Kansas City. We lead the nation in best health outcomes for people living with HIV. But none of that would be possible without the tireless work of AIDS Service Foundation, without the millions of dollars that are raised by AIDS Walk. We are really changing the way people live and love and have children by your gracious donations. Thank you.
AIDS Walk is April 27th, and we'll be in Tice Park, where thousands of people will gather to support our friends here in this community who are living with HIV/AIDS. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
And now please join me in the dedication of the offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
The river is famous to the fish. The loud voice is famous to silence, which knew it would inherit the earth before anybody said so. The cat sleeping on the fence is famous to the birds watching him from the birdhouse. The tear is famous, briefly, to the cheek. The idea you carry close to your bosom is famous to your bosom. The boot is famous to the earth, more famous than the dress shoe, which is famous only to floors. The bent photograph is famous to the one who carries it, and not at all famous to the one who is pictured. I want to be famous to shuffling men who smile when crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines. Famous as the one who smiled back. I want to be famous in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole, not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do.
Please rise, embody your spirit, and we'll sing We Laugh, We Cry.
It is not enough, said her father, that you get all A's each quarter, play Mozart for your kinfolk, win starred first in concerts. You must come home on your wedding night. It is not enough, said her mother, that you smile at Auntie Lockwood, take cookies to the neighbors, keep quiet when I'm napping. You must cure my asthma. It is not enough, said her husband,
that you write letters to my parents, fix pumpkin pie and pastry, forget your name was Bauer, you must always, you must never. It is not enough, said her children, that you make us female brownies, tend our friends and puppies, buy us Nike tinnies. You must let us kill you. It is not enough, said her pastor, that you teach the second graders, change the cloths and candles, kneel prostrate at the altar. As long as there are starving children in the world, you must not eat without guilt. It is not enough, said her counselor, that you struggle with the demons, integrate your childhood, leave when your time is over. You must stop crying, clarify your poetic symbols, and not feel that you are not enough. I give up, she said. I am not enough. And laid down into the deep blue pocket of night to wait for death. She waited, and finally, her heart exploded, her breathing stopped. They came with stretcher, took her clothes off, covered her with linen, then went away, and left her locked in deep blue pocket tomb. The voice said, you are enough. Naked, crying, bleeding, nameless, starving, sinful, you are enough. And the third day, she sat up, asked for milk and crackers, dressed herself with wings, and flew away. My husband, Joe, finished high school at age 17 and went straight to work driving a forklift in a warehouse. He earned what seemed to him like a lot of money. He could afford his sweet bachelor pad, frequent tickets to rock concerts, and all the tuna helper a guy could want. He worked at various physically demanding jobs for about 7 years, but eventually that wore thin. So at age 24, thanks to Pell Grants and an aunt and uncle who offered him a room in their home, he started college to become a pharmacist. Once he started school, my laid-back rock and roller boyfriend turned into a study warrior. He studied like no one I had ever witnessed, certainly not the way I studied. He made flashcards, he wrote outlines, and he was disciplined. He followed his plan for how to approach each class, and it worked. He graduated with honors and got a job easily. Soon after graduation, he was hired as a clinical pharmacist at the hospital in Emporia, Kansas. We had married the year before, so we moved to Emporia, where I got a job teaching English at Emporia High. As a new pharmacist, he approached his work with that same energy he had brought to his studying. He brought work home, and he helped to develop the clinical program at the hospital. Soon he was clinical coordinator, and he continued working those long hours. And then everything changed. Our first daughter was born. He stopped accepting assignments and bringing work home so that he could spend more time as a father to our daughter. I was so pleased that he wanted to be involved. I admired him for choosing family over work. And at the same time, I was kind of confused. He'd worked so hard, and now he was giving it all up? What happened to his ambition? Shouldn't a person strive to be the best in all things? He chose to focus on what was most important to him, his family, and let go of all the striving and the long hours. He would do his job competently and sufficiently, but he would not work to be a star. He had chosen the medium chill. The phrase, the medium chill, comes from a blog post written by David Roberts on the website Grist. Roberts works and lives in Seattle with his partner and his children. In the post, he writes, "About a year ago, I was visiting with an old friend of mine who lives in Portland. He's helping to run a tech startup, working 80-hour weeks, with barely enough time at home to maintain a relationship with his dog, much less a romance. The goal, he said, is to grow like crazy, get bought out by Google, and retire at 40. It's the big chill, man." Not the movie. I shook my head and laughed. I'll take the medium chill. Roberts, the writer of this blog, and his partner have good jobs and have opportunities for advancement, but they say they are choosing to step off the aspirational treadmill in order to have more free time to focus on relationships and experiences. He says they live in a small house in an inexpensive neighborhood, drive an older car that has seen better days, and find joy in simple pleasures like reading with their kids and date nights with cheap wine and a rented movie. Going further down their respective career paths would earn more money, but he writes, it would also mean more work, greater responsibilities, higher stress, and less time to lay around the living room with the kids. I realize that these two examples of my husband and the writer of the blog don't represent all people. The choices that the writer of the blog and my husband made to pull back at work were made possible by a certain amount of privilege. They both have jobs that pay well enough that they don't have to knock themselves out to earn enough to live on. Not everyone has these choices. But among Americans with privilege, these two people have behaved in ways that are countercultural. My somewhat puzzled reaction to Joe's choice to pull back and the writer's friend's ambition are more reflective of what our American culture tells us is important and what makes us valuable: accruing wealth, achieving more, and striving for perfection. If we choose to not buy more, do more, and be more than our culture tells us we are not doing our part, that we are not enough just as we are. I confess that I have fallen prey to the lure of achievement and especially perfectionism. So I'll confess. This past December, I had a school project to create an Advent Vesper service. and I held it at my home congregation in Lawrence. At the service, I was planning to talk about the expectations that our materialist culture places on us at Christmas time, the push to create the perfect family photo, to decorate and cook like Martha Stewart, to buy expensive gifts. And at this service, the attendees would be invited to write their own to-don't lists. The things like, I'm not going to stress about the food. I'm not going to worry about if my house is clean. I'll have people over anyway. I'm not going to compare myself to others in terms of gift giving or entertaining or card sending. As I was preparing that service, I spent a lot of time worrying about how to create a beautiful altar in front of the sanctuary. I didn't feel confident in my ability to pull it off, and I was stressed out. I wanted it to be simple, but elegant. I wanted it to be perfect. I hope you're starting to hear the irony of the situation. The service was on a Friday, so on Wednesday, I spent about 3 hours shopping at all the home decor stores in Lawrence for items to put on this altar. I ended up spending way more money than I had planned. So now, in addition to worrying about how the altar might look, I'm worrying about how I'm going to justify spending this money. And then I start thinking, what are the ethics of returning things that I've only used for an hour on an altar? I was a mess. I was making myself sick worrying about the stupid altar for a service that was about letting go of things that don't matter. Like being perfect, like material goods, like keeping up appearances. After driving around with all that stuff rattling in my trunk for a day or two, I did come to my senses, and I laughed out loud when I realized how absurd it was. I returned all the beautiful things that I had bought, and I instead gathered items from home and asked my friends if I could borrow things. And the altar was lovely. It was a personal illustration of how perfectionism can drive us. I think I'm pretty self-aware, but it got me. I had moved beyond just trying to do something well to trying to make it perfect. And as a result, I was stressed and anxious and cranky. Brene Brown, a social science researcher who studies and writes a lot about vulnerability and shame, explores the difference between perfectionism and striving for excellence or self-improvement. Perfectionism, she says, is the belief that if we do things perfectly and look perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame and judgment and shame. It's about trying to earn approval. Healthy striving is self-focused. How can I improve? While perfectionism is other-focused. What will they think? And instead of improving performance, perfectionism hampers your achievement. It's correlated with depression, anxiety, addiction, and life paralysis or missed opportunities. The fear of failing, of making mistakes, of not meeting people's expectations, and being criticized keeps us outside of the arena where healthy competition and striving unfolds. Brown's point about missed opportunities because of perfectionism rings true to me. I know when I'm struggling with perfectionism, I'm likely to avoid those situations in which I might look foolish or somehow not live up to the impossible standards I have set for myself. This affects my ability to try new things, to take appropriate risks, and to accept change gracefully. I'm working on it. In addition to affecting mental health and opportunities for new experiences, perfectionism and excessive focus on achievement has a negative impact on our relationships. It leaves people with little time to build and maintain those connections with the people they love. After meeting and working with many dying people as a palliative care nurse, Australian Bronnie Ware wrote a book titled The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. One of the 5 most common things that her patients said they regretted was that they had not stayed in touch with their friends. Now at the ends of their lives, they wish they had made time earlier in their busy lives to keep those connections strong. Another regret expressed by many patients and by almost all of her male patients, she said, was that they wished they had not worked so hard. These patients went on to share that they had spent most of their lives at work and had not taken time to initiate, develop, and maintain relationships with their children during their growing up time and time with their significant others. But of all the regrets that her patients shared with her, she reports that the most common was, "I wish I'd had a courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me." Living up to other people's expectations meant that these folks felt like they had never lived their lives authentically. The emphasis from our culture on achievement and perfection has costs that are larger than those that just affect individuals. It also affects the work that we do to make justice in the world. With problems as large and seemingly intractable, such as climate change, racial injustice, and the suffering at our border, we can get sucked into believing that what we do doesn't matter. We may feel that we do not know enough, that our efforts won't be enough, that we are not brave enough, that we are not enough. We'll never live up to that impossible standard of perfection, and so we do nothing. The irony of what I'm telling you is that the truth is each of us individually does not know enough, cannot do enough, is not enough. Individualism, belief that we can do it alone, is as much of a losing proposition as is perfectionism. But while individually we can't do enough, together, that's a different story. If we can overcome our tendency toward individualism and learn to rely on one another, together we can know, do, and be enough to make a difference. I'd like to see change in our culture. I'd like to see our culture let go of the unhealthy striving and focus on some things that I think are worth working for. Some characteristics I'd like to see us value more. Like instead of individualism, I'd like to see us put more value on mutual dependence. Instead of valuing competition and winning, I'd like to see us value collaboration and cooperation. Instead of valuing perfection, I'd like to see us put on our red "Make America Good Enough" hats. I'd like to see us strive mightily to live the good enough life. In this good enough life, those of us who have plenty of resources will feel secure enough to share them, and those who lack resources will receive a sufficient amount. In this good enough life, we'll all have the health care that we need, and none of us will have to choose between paying for medicine or paying for food. I'd also like to see us strive mightily to be famous, not like the Kardashians, but like the person in the poem that Cheryl read earlier. Someone who is famous to shuffling men who smile when crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines, famous as the one who smiled back. And famous in the way a pulley is famous or a buttonhole, not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. Living a life that is true to who you are is a good enough way to be famous. I'd like for us to strive to turn down the volume on the voices that say we are not enough, and instead listen to the one that spoke to the woman in the poem after she had lain down to wait for death. The voice that told her, "You are enough," so that after resting she could dress herself with wings and fly away. I'd like to see us strive to have more dance parties with our friends. Maybe like Gerald, whether we can tango like the lions or not, and know that we are good enough at dancing and good enough at being who we are, and that human connections are our most precious gift. Culture change is slow and cumbersome, but we can start with ourselves. We are enough, and that's good enough. So I'm happy to have all you kindred pilgrim souls as my ship's companions as we learn to be enough together. So will you rise, embody your spirit, and together we'll sing Blue Boat Home. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of reason, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we take with us in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing words come from L.R. Nost. Do not be dismayed by the brokenness in the world. All things break, and all things can be mended. Not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you. Amen.
Catch you, Jake. Don't worry, that we consider ourselves.
Yes, you did.